So guys, I've had this video going on in the works for a long time, and I keep going back to the footage, and I want to show you as much detail as possible, but there's so much detail. I've got hours and hours of footage. This build, I did a lot of experimenting, and so I did my best to distill it down to the pertinent aspects. What you need to be able to see this and feel like you have the confidence to go and build this yourself. And I mean, hats off to people like Matthew Cremona and Mark Spagnolo and April Wilkerson and all the other YouTubers out there that do just an excellent job of taking a big complex project, distilling it down to the parts that you need to feel like you can move forward and, knock out that project. I hope I lived up to those people I looked to inspiration for, and this is the dresser I made for my daughter's bedroom. Yeah, it's much nicer than the one in my bedroom, which I'm sure my wife will make me remedy shortly, happily. It was a really fun project. It was really challenging, and a lot of fun to get it done right before she was born so that the bedroom was ready to go. And look forward to some of the videos of the video. There's parts with my wife, pregnant as all can be, and I'm sure we'll look back on that and enjoy it in the future. So that's my other boss telling me I gotta go, and enjoy the video. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and as always, I appreciate you guys watching and taking the time. So like every other project, I'm starting off picking from my rack of wood, figuring out the rough dimensions, plus or minus an inch. Well, mostly plus an inch. Then from here I'll take it over to the joiner after cutting it to rough length. This space between my table saw and my MFT table is great for that because the blade for thicker lumber is way long. Couple quick trips over the planer. Well, joiner. It's a joiner planer combo. Now it's going through the planer. Both sides. Ooh, fancy. So once it's gone through the joiner and the planer, and I've got 3 sides square, I can rest the good 90-degree angles up against the table saw fence and cut the first of my legs. By the way, the design on this dresser is meant to mimic the crib design that we picked out for. My wife asked me, gave me the opportunity to make a crib, and it was very tempting. I very much wanted to do it, but I was afraid that if anything ever went wrong, that I pretty much would never forgive myself, and thought it was better to go ahead and go with the tried and true method that the commercial company provided. I know. Y'all can make fun of me in the comments for that. So I'm trimming one end nice and square. I'm flipping it over and using my stop to trim it to final length. And a plunger outer is great for making mortises. I like to define my start and stop point. And then even if a little dust gets in the way while you're making your long passes, you can feel when you've reached the end of your mortise. So you don't have to be quite as visually intensive with this method. but just make sure those first holes are full depth. I got a nice long piece of flats-on walnut here that I can use to make the rails and some of the cross members for the rest of the dresser. Cutting it to length and having a little fun. And I'm using the dresser legs to determine the same width so that I have proportion. The width of the rails matches one of the dimensions of the leg, so we have continuity in design. And this last piece, I was hoping I would have just enough, but as you can see, there's a little bit on the inside, or in the middle there, that just wasn't quite good enough. I could have hidden this on the back side of the dresser, up against, one of the, up against the top of the dresser, and it would have been fine. Structurally, it was perfectly strong, but I didn't like the idea of shortcutting. So I cut another piece out of my scrap pile, and it was kind of a pain getting it to the same exact thickness as everything else, but was able to do it, and I like the fact that I didn't shortcut anything. Now I'm cutting the tenons to match the mortises I made earlier. And if I had been smart, I would have made the offset the same as it was. I had to set the table saw for two different heights for this. And after cleaning up the edges and rounding them over, I got a nice little test fit here. And I'm pretty happy with that fit. So now that I'm able to create some sub-assemblies, I've taken the real dimension of my 3/4 inch plywood, and I'm tracing that around, and I'm actually going to set this in and create a panel and frame assembly. This is a pretty big chunk that I'm cutting out here, so I took my time and made sure that towards the end, I knew I wasn't going to be able to get all the way up in the corner like I wanted to, so I grabbed my little Bosch Colt handheld router and finished up the job. It did nicely. On one of the others, I got video, but it took so long. I did it with a chisel, kind of the old-fashioned way, and the handheld palm router did just a great job in a quarter of the time. But if you're into chisels, there's another way. And my wonderful wife, about to pop there and still willing to help me move around plywood in the shop. And then, she's good enough to me to feign curiosity
and we want to look at the plywood and inspect it. So a little out of order there. I cut the panels and test fit everything, and everything looked good. Now I'm just assembling and gluing the frame together. And it looks a little wobbly. As soon as you get everything really seated and clamped back together, it was rock solid. Now I'm cutting in little grooves so that I have a way to attach the top of the dresser to the frame of the dresser. And now I'm making my little fasteners, tabletop fasteners. Just set up a dado stack, buried it a little bit in the fence. I can come in and cut on both sides and then flip the sides over and cut off 4 at a time. Then I do a little countersink, and that right there is how I make my tabletop hold downs. Patent pending. Now that the frame's glued up, or dried, the glue has dried up, I can turn it on its face. This is the back panels that I'm routing out. And I did put the little cup on the other side and did a test to see how well Festool's dust extraction works for a router in this type of operation. And it was noticeably better. Still quite a bit of dust is created, as you can imagine, but it was a substantial improvement. I'd still recommend for anyone who's sensitive to wood dust, especially some of the wood dust that you're more sensitive to still wear a respirator. Back panels seem to fit well. Now I'm on to making the drawers. And I ran them through the same operation of planing them down to the appropriate thickness. And I went ahead and picked up a dovetail jig because there's going to be a lot of dovetails, and I didn't want to cut them all by hand. They're strong enough on their own. They don't get any stronger just because you cut them by hand. And I was on a time crunch, so I was surprised. These things have always looked perplexing to me, trying to figure out how to keep it all in order. And, once you create a little system, and for me, I marked front, back, side, and it was really easy to keep in line, and I was surprised I didn't miscut any of them, which I honestly expected that I was going to do. Now I'm cutting the bottoms of the drawers and testing to make sure they seem to fit. They do. I did intend for that dado to fall in the middle of the pin. As it is, I had to go in and fill that extra void that you saw that got cut off the dovetail. I guess I didn't have to, but I just didn't want that void there. And I apologize, during glue up I had a battery failure. So it kind of jumps around here in a little bit. And one other, I don't know if it's a mistake because it's stronger, but if I had this to do all over again, I would have put the rabbeted edge so that the smaller dimension was facing down instead of facing up. And what you can see is I've got that lip, but the lip is below the drawer bottom, if that makes sense. And what that means is, unless you cut that perfectly, you're always going to have little gaps around the edges. If I were to flip the bottom of the drawer bottom over, it would always hide that. It would always be a clean, crisp edge, and that gap would be underneath the drawer, and who cares, because nobody sees that. So next time I make one, I will flip those drawer bottoms over, and I just figured I'd point that out for you guys, so that if you decide to make something like this or this dresser, that you can make the decision to hide it if you want. And I've always enjoyed making spacers for installing drawer slides. I think it's the only way to do it. It gives you a very consistent method of spacing your drawer slides. You rarely ever have any alignment issues, and I would recommend, though, that you mark the front side as like I did with the dimension there, and always keep that facing out, so that if you do have any inconsistency in the way you made that board, it's replicated throughout. And these are the slide releases for the undermount hardware. Super easy install. And I used this jig here, or this bit here, to make the drawer pulls. And you can see I already cut out the majority of the center of that to give the bit a little less wood it has to hog through. This is not the type of operation you can just inch it up like you can with some other router operations. So you want to remove as much material as possible to give the bit the easiest job possible. And now I'm making the tabletop, milling these boards down to their final width. And for alignment, I'm going to go ahead and use some of the small Festool dominoes. If you don't have a Festool domino, you don't need to have anything for alignment. You can use dowels if you want to use something for alignment, or biscuits. Biscuits are another great option. It seems like anyone who's been in woodworking for a while, or watched the Yankee Workshop, we all have an extra biscuit joiner laying around. And now that I've let that glue dry and everything's set and ready to go, I can cut the table to the dresser's top to the proper dimensions. And cut off the edges, or the ends. Now I'm going to set the piece back a little bit from the edge of the track saw, and put the track saw at a 10 degree, I believe is what I ended up choosing, angle. What this does is it'll give me a short flat area before the bevel, which adds just a little bit of extra detail. And with any of the track saws, it makes it very easy to replicate this on the longer ends as well. And of course, you got to finish it up with a smoothing plane to make sure everything's nice and smooth and crisp. I figured instead of making you guys sit through this whole process, I would do a quick little stop motion time lapse so you could get the idea of the full thing without necessarily having to sit through it all. Basically, this was one evening, getting all the drawer fronts installed and aligned, and all the slides. You can see the soft close feature and that nice matte finish. And of course, we got to get all the pictures hung and everything else. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video and you're new to the channel, please like, subscribe, share this video, and if you've got any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I do my best to respond to those as best I can.